I shall give you a boy who will be your grandson. This is the magnificent divine prophecy received by his grandfather, Hazrat Mirza Ahmad, the promised Messiah. His father, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih II, announced on the 26th of September 1909, Allah has given me the glad tiding that I will be blessed with a son who will be a Nasir-ud-Din, helper of faith. He will be committed to serving Islam. It is also said that he, the Messiah, shall die and his kingdom descend to his son and the grandson. These prophecies were fulfilled in the person of Hazrat Hafiz Mirza Nasir Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih III.
ए नासिर दीन तेरी यादें हैं क़ल्बो नज़र का सरमाया इन यादों से हम जीते जी यादों के चमन महकाएंगे
Hazrat Hafiz Mirza Nasir Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih III, was born to Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad and Hazrat Sayyida Nasir Mahmuda Begum Sahiba on the 16th of November 1909 in Qadian.
Hazrat Amma Jan and Hazrat Nusrat Jahan Begum, the wife of the promised Messiah alayhi salam, she took care of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih soon after his birth, and literally he was brought up all along in her custody and up until I think his marriage.
Under the directions of his revered father, he committed the whole of the Holy Quran to memory at the age of 13 in 1922. He learned Arabic and Urdu from Hazrat Maulvi Sarvar Shah Sahib.
Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib, the Khalifatul Masih III, was a highly educated person, not only in religious education but also in secular education. He joined the Madrasa Ahmadiyya, which is a school for Arabic and religious teachings. He passed from there and joined Jamia Ahmadiyya, from where he did his Maulvi Fazil degree from the Punjab University. He stood third in Maulvi Fazil examination and got top numbers. After the completion of his Arabic education as Maulvi Fazil, he joined the government college at Lahore. He did his BA from the government college Lahore, and then his father, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II, Radiyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, decided that he should be sent to England for further education.
On the 5th of August 1934, he was married to Hazrat Sayyida Mansoura Begum Sahiba, who was the daughter of Hazrat Nawab Muhammad Ali Khan Sahib and Hazrat Sayyida Nawab Mubaraka Begum Sahiba. He then proceeded to England on the 6th of September 1934 for postgraduate studies at Balliol College, Oxford, and in due course obtained the honours degree of the University of Oxford and later became Master of Arts of the university. While in England, he started the publication of a quarterly magazine, Al-Islam. After completing his education, he returned to India on the 9th of November 1938.
As a Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimullah returned from the UK after his studies in 1938, and he was appointed in Jamia Ahmadiyya in Qadian and as a lecturer, as a professor in Jamia Ahmadiyya, and then later on became its principal as well.
A few years later, he was to become principal of the prestigious TI College, Rabwa.
Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib was the first principal appointed of this great institution. So we can say that he was the founder, principal of this Talimul Islam College, and under his supervision and guidance, the whole structure of the college was established from nothing, and he organized everything, he arranged for everything, and by the grace of Allah, it was properly functioning at the time of the partition. One can say that by the grace of Allah, in every aspect, the college was really a model for the rest of the educational institutions in Pakistan. And that was all done under the kind supervision and care and guidance of Hazrat Sahibzada Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib, who continued to be the principal of Talimul Islam College right from the beginning, from 1944 to 1965.
One of his next appointments was to the post of the president of the Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya organization.
Majlis Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya, as you're aware, was founded in 1938, and the following year, in 1939, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah was appointed as its Sadr, as its president. And at that time, there was no limit to the tenure as well, so he was its president for 10 years till 1949. And thereafter, it is not that commonly known even amongst our Khuddam as well, that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Radhiyallahu Anhu then actually was also its Sadr, not just at its inception, but also took over the reins, because it was a very difficult period leading up to 1954 with the anti-Ahmadiyya riots as well. So Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani, Hazrat Muslim Radhiyallahu Anhu became, for a good number of years, became its Sadr. And then for the day-to-day administration again, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah was its Naib Sadr, or the vice president, and he carried on in that position till 1954, and then, of course, in other capacities as well after that.
At the time of partition, he stayed in Qadian, but immigrated to Pakistan on the 16th of November 1947. He was to play a major role in the setting up of the Furqan Force Battalion.
Furqan Force was a body of members of the Ahmadiyya community. It was the brainchild of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Radhiyallahu Anhu as a Muslim out, and it was primarily to ensure that the government of Pakistan, to give the government of Pakistan able-bodied people who could serve in Kashmir itself, because at that time, especially with the first war over Kashmir as well from 1948 onwards, it was felt that a lot of members were required to help out in various activities, not necessarily in fighting, but it was similar to perhaps the Homeland Force, which viewers in the UK perhaps may be able to relate to. And a lot of sacrifices were made at that time by a lot of individuals, and they lived in very harsh conditions in Kashmir, helping out in the low-lying areas around the war zones as well. And they assisted the people of Kashmir greatly at that time. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah, if I remember correctly, was there for roughly between a year to 2 years, from 1948 to 1950 perhaps. And again, a lot of members, some of his brothers were there as well, and a lot of members of the community were there serving at that time, staying away from friends and family, living in very harsh conditions at that time.
In 1953, mass riots took place in Pakistan due to Ahmadi opposition.
In 1953, a storm of opposition was raised by the non-Ahmadi ulamas against the Ahmadiyya community, demanding that the Ahmadiyya community should be declared a non-Muslim minority in Pakistan. Hundreds of Ahmadi houses were burned, many were martyred, and these were very difficult times for the Ahmadis in Pakistan. Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib, who later became Khalifatul Masih III, was the principal of TI College, Lahore. I was also a student in those days in Lahore, and I witnessed all those things with my own eyes. In May 1953, the government decided to arrest some of the top Ahmadis. Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib was at his residence in Lahore when around 4 o'clock in the morning, an army officer knocked at his door, and Hazrat Sahab came out of his residence, and the officer said to him that I have warrants of arrest for you. So Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib told him to wait for a few minutes so that he can finish his Fajr prayer, and then he will go with him. And then with a smile on his face, he said, I was waiting for you because I knew that you are coming, which means that God had already informed him that he was going to be arrested that morning. So they took him to Lahore jail. A case was lodged against him in which he was given the sentence of 5 years imprisonment.
In November 1954, he was appointed president of Majlis Ansarullah. During his tenure as president, he infused a new life into the organization. In May 1955, he served as the president of the Sadr Anjuman Ahmadiyya, which office, though honorary, involved the discharge of heavy responsibilities at the center of the organizational pattern of the movement. He carried out the arduous responsibilities of the president diligently, remaining in this position until his election as the Khalifa 10 years later. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II passed away at 2 a.m. on the 8th of November 1965. The members of the community converged in large numbers upon Rabwa.
The election of the third caliph took place, and that happened on 8th of November 1965, and the venue was Masjid Mubarak in Rabwa, and the time was 7:30 in the evening after the Isha prayer. The meeting was presided by Hazrat Mirza Aziz Ahmad Sahib, who was at that time the Nazir-e-Ala of Sadr Anjuman Ahmadiyya, Pakistan. He presided over the session, and in that meeting, according to these rules and regulations, the election took place. So following these rules and regulations, when the proceeding of the meeting conducted in Masjid Mubarak, through this meeting, Alhamdulillah, that the name of Hazrat Sahibzada Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib was presented, and all members of the Electoral College, they unanimously agreed on that one, and he was in that way elected as the third successor of the promised Messiah, alayhi salatu wasalam. Naturally, those people who were extremely grieved at the passing away of Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, by the grace of Allah, once again the life came back to those people, and they were quite happy and satisfied and full of gratitude that once again the whole Ahmadiyya Muslim community was again united at the hand of Khalifatul Masih.
The college met in a deeply prayerful mood, and Sahibzada Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib, eldest son of the departed Khalifatul Masih, was elected Khalifatul Masih III by an overwhelming majority of the Electoral College. All the members of the Electoral College entered afresh into covenant of allegiance on his blessed hand. He made a brief address, and then all those who were outside of the Masjid Mubarak, numbering well over 5,000, took the oath of allegiance. As soon as the choice of the Electoral College became known, it was universally felt as if comfort and consolation were descending upon every heart from heaven. On the 9th of November at 4:30 p.m. at the Bahishti Maqbara, Rabwa, the funeral led by the newly elected Khalifa was a deeply moving experience for everyone.
Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib, rahimahullah ta'ala, was serving the Jamaat as the principal of Talimul Islam College, Rabwa, before he was elected as Khalifatul Masih. When he was elected as Khalifatul Masih, he was 56 years old at that time. The most poignant tragedy of his revered father's death was faced by him when he was elected as Khalifatul Masih III. His father, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih II, Al-Musrahul Maud, radiyallahu anhu, had passed away. But he proved to be a wonderful source of comfort, satisfaction, and consolation to all the members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat all over the world, not only for that time, but also through the series of crises the Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya faced in the future at different times during his Khilafat.
The blessed period of his Khilafat lasted for 17 years. From the beginning of his Khilafat, he showed proof of great zeal and drive in the pursuit of the objectives of the movement.
On 17th of December 1965, Huzur Rahimahullah Ta'ala's first year of his Khilafat initiated the very first project of his Khilafat, where he proposed that a network of food banks be created whereby no member of the community should ever go hungry. He also exhorted the members of the community to refrain from all kinds of un-Islamic rituals. The initiative was very successful.
One of the most important projects which was also initiated during the early days of his Khilafat was the setting up of the Fazl-e-Umal Foundation in memory of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II on the 21st of December 1965.
Before his birth, Hazrat Masih Maud made a prophecy, which is a very famous prophecy of Muslim Maud, in which he said that God will give him a son who will lead the nations and who will be a great man, and he will be a nation builder. So we believe that Hazrat Mirza Mahmud Ahmad Sahib, Khalifatul Masih II Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, was the Muslim Maud. When he died, it was decided that a foundation should be set up which should carry on with the work that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih did in his own lifetime. The first project was to write a biography of the life of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu. The first part of it was done by Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, which has already been published. There are various other projects which are being done by the Fazl Umar Foundation these days, and it has done a lot of work. There are scholarships that are being given by Fazl Umar Foundation for students to go abroad and study. So it's a vast scheme, and by the grace of God, they are doing a very, very good job.
A new building was constructed for the Khilafat Library in Rabwa, which was one of the projects envisioned by the foundation.
So in 1970, the foundation stone of the Khilafat Library was laid by Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III at Rabwa. In 1971, the inauguration ceremony took place. I was present during this ceremony, and it has more than 100,000 books now. I think this is the largest library in the outskirts of that particular area.
Among various other projects carried out under the auspices of this foundation were construction of a guest house in Rabwa, publication of the book Khutbat-e-Mahmud, which contains all the sermons of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II in 3 volumes. Cash prizes were awarded to scholars who submitted their dissertations to the foundation on a wide variety of topics. On the 12th of March 1966, Huzur introduced the short-term dedication project known as the Waqf-e-Arzi.
The purpose of this project is to promote the learning and teaching of the Holy Quran, as well as imparting a religious knowledge to local members. At their own expense, under Waqf-e-Arzi, thousands of Ahmadis are teaching the Holy Quran to the members of the community, exhorting them to do good deeds and shun evil. The net result of this activity is that members of the Ahmadi Muslim community are receiving religious education and moral training.
A famous revelation of the promised Messiah is, "Kings will seek blessings from thy garments." This prophecy was first fulfilled during the time of the Third Khilafat in the person of Sir Singate, who was elected Governor General of Gambia, West Africa. Mr. Singate, a devout Ahmadi Muslim, was previously president of all the Ahmadiyya branches in Gambia.
Once Singate was elected as head of state of the Gambia, he said fervent prayers thanked Allah for his elevation. For some time, he continued to pray. Then, after his prayers, he made a request. And everybody sees that that was a historic request. And the request was to requested Hazrat Khalifatul Masih the third that if he could give him a piece of the promised Messiah's garment.
In 1967, Huzur travelled to Europe for the first time after becoming Khalifatul Masih. This journey was beneficial in many aspects and significant according to an earlier glad tiding given by God Almighty. Ominous signs of God's support and succor were observed by all. He visited Germany, Switzerland, Holland, Denmark and England. Whilst in Copenhagen, Huzur inaugurated the Nusrat Jahan Mosque on the 21st of July 1967.
It's a very impressive mosque. I mean, first of all, it is a very good sign that this mosque is built by women, while women are considered, I mean, those who have nothing to say, nothing to do in Islam. So they contributed, I mean, even under very, very hard and difficult circumstances, enough money to build these mosques. And the Copenhagen Mosque, especially the Denmark Mosque in Copenhagen, is a special sign for a modern style of architecture. It is a round mosque with a very interesting, I mean, light contribution. It creates a very, very wonderful atmosphere inside.
Huzur conveyed the message of Islam splendidly in all the countries he visited by holding press conferences and addressing large audiences. He warned the inhabitants of Europe that the only way out of another catastrophe for them was to accept Islam and to turn with true hearts to their Creator. In London, Huzur addressed a large gathering on the 28th of July 1967 at Wandsworth Town Hall. Huzur's topic was a message of peace and a word of warning.
Huzur arrived in England on his first tour after the Khilafat in 1967. The UK Jamaat had arranged a huge dinner party at the Wandsworth Town Hall, and Huzur delivered a speech there, which was later on printed by the name of A Word of Warning. After this speech, you know, this was a wonderful speech in which he told the Western people that if they would not return to God, they would be destroyed. So the next day and a few days afterward also, this speech was, some parts of the speech was reproduced in the newspapers of England and then in the newspapers of the world. So this is it's a small pamphlet, but it's very important because Huzur made some prophecies in it, and he warned the Western nation to return to God.
While in London, he attended the 4th annual convention, known as the Jalsa Salana of the Ahmadiyya community in the United Kingdom. This was the first annual convention of the community in the United Kingdom graced by a Khalifa. Huzur addressed the Jalsa on the 30th of July 1967.
Africa has to play a very important role in the life of man in times to come.
On the 4th of April 1970, Huzur embarked on a 9-week tour of West Africa. He visited Nigeria, Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Liberia, Gambia and Sierra Leone. Large Ahmadiyya communities had flourished in these countries for quite some time. Members had longed to see Huzur in person. At last, their intense desire was fulfilled. African Ahmadi men, women, children and even elderly travelled long distances to see Huzur. They chanted heartwarming religious poems and uplifting slogans in their traditional ways. Huzur's inspiring speeches strengthened their faith. During Huzur's epic travel to this continent, many eminent personalities of African countries had audience with Huzur. and attended the receptions given in his honor. They readily acknowledged educational, social, as well as spiritual services rendered by the movement. Newspapers, radio, and television gave wide coverage to his travels. In a nutshell, this journey was a tremendous success in many respects. In fact, it heralded a new era of preaching in West Africa. At the end of his visit to West Africa, he arrived in London, and in his Friday sermon of the 24th of May 1970 at the Fazl Mosque, gave a brief account of the impressions he had gathered in West Africa. He announced a scheme that he had conceived under divine direction of expanding the activities of the movement in West Africa through the establishment of a substantial number of schools and hospitals, which were a great need for the people of Africa.
And this scheme, he mentioned it as Nusrat Jahan scheme, and he requested the Jamaat to make available for the scheme to be implemented £100,000 sterling, and that that should be done within 3 years if this amount was, because he wanted the scheme to start. And the salient points of the scheme was that that this was to be launched in West African countries.
On the 26th of June 1970, he called upon Ahmadi doctors and teachers to volunteer their services for work in Africa, and mentioned that if the number of volunteers did not correspond to the need, he would himself select the teachers and doctors who would be required to proceed to Africa.
When Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III, rahimahullah ta'ala, wanted to introduce this divine scheme, there were so many hurdles and difficulties in the way, as normally it does happen whenever there is any such divine scheme is to be launched. But because of his dynamic leadership and his continuous humble supplications to Allah the Almighty, all these hurdles and difficulties were removed by the grace of God Almighty. And later on, all the schemes which were introduced under this scheme and institutions that were set up in pursuance of this scheme was most gratifying and proved to be very fruitful.
When Hazur Raziallah Ta'ala Anhu announced the Nusrat Jahan scheme, lots of doctors, physicians and surgeons volunteered for the scheme. But I suspect that when they volunteered, most of them didn't have any idea of the conditions that they would be going out to work in, moving to parts of rural Africa where there was literally nothing. Small towns and villages, in some cases the clinics didn't have proper buildings. They had very little in the way of medical supplies and medicines, and yet the work that they were able to do to tend to the needs of the local people were, considering the conditions, almost miraculous. And although their aim was to help as many people as possible for free, they were still successful from a financial point of view, such that they were able to build the buildings that they needed, able to equip them with the medical supplies that they needed in order to run their clinics as well as possible. In fact, many of the clinics were so successful that they were able to multiply and open further clinics in other parts of Africa. The Nusrat Jahan scheme for clinics and hospitals has been most successful in countries like Ghana and Nigeria and Sierra Leone, and have been a huge boon for the local people over the last 20 or 30 years.
In 1970, Huzur again visited Europe to oversee and accelerate the diverse activities of the Jamaat. During this tour, he visited the United Kingdom, Holland, Switzerland, West Germany and Spain. The highlight of the tour was the opening ceremony of the Mahmud Mosque in Zurich on the 5th of April 1970. During this tour, a large hall adjacent to the Fazl Mosque in London was also inaugurated by Huzur on the 23rd of May 1970. It was built in memory of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II and was named after him as the Mahmud Hall. The foundation stone of this hall was laid by Huzur on the 30th of July 1967. The hall played a vital role in the progress of the community when it became the hub of the operations for the community's global television channel, MTA International. Huzur toured Spain for the first time from the 25th of May to the 1st of June 1970. During this tour, Allah revealed to him that in future times to come, the Jamaat will have tremendous success and expansion in Spain, which was unthinkable at the time. On the 31st of March 1972, Huzur inaugurated the magnificent Al-Aqsa Mosque in Rabwa, accommodating over 150,000 worshippers. The Ahmadiyya movement was formally initiated in March 1889 and completed its first century in March 1989. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III made an announcement concerning the celebration of the centenary of the movement in the annual conference of 1973, in which he enumerated a number of projects which he had in mind in connection with the centenary. Huzur called upon the community to pledge the amount of 25 million rupees to finance the projects and the celebration of the centenary. The pledges, however, received in this respect were 4 times the requested amount.
But one thing more very importantly, which Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah Ta'ala started regarding the celebration of the first centenary, that was the spiritual program for that. So Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he invited the attention of the members of the Jamaat that Jamaat Ahmadiyya firmly believes in the divine support with the help of Allah Almighty, and everything can be accomplished and can only be accomplished if the divine help is there. For that purpose, everybody was reminded that they should particularly follow those guidelines which Huzur gave in detail. And he pointed out certain prayers, that these are the prayers of the Holy Quran and given by the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which the members have to repeat in so many times.
In 1973, Huzur embarked upon his 3rd European tour. He visited the UK, Holland, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Sweden and Denmark. The bigoted section of Orthodox Muslim divines in Pakistan were much perturbed by the announcements of Huzur concerning the centenary celebrations. Time after time, the plans that they had devised for the purpose of stopping the progress of the movement had been frustrated. By the grace and mercy of God, and from each trial, the movement had emerged in greater strength and spirit. Rather than learning a lesson from their repeated experiences, their bitterness and hostility towards the movement had continued to mount, and the announcement of the centenary celebrations put them in a mood of desperation.
Well, I think it was in April 1974 when an incident was, a very unpleasant incident, was orchestrated by the mullahs on the Rabwa station. And as a result of that, as they had planned, a wave of protests, marches and riots were created by them throughout the Pakistan against the Ahmadi Muslims. In those riots, hundreds of people were actually martyred, they were killed, including women and children. Their properties were looted, their houses, their shops, their businesses were burned, and it was absolutely callous. And the important thing is that throughout these atrocities against humanity, for no reason other than the faith, that the police and the federal security services, they all were present there in hundreds, but they always stood purely as they looked upon, and they enjoyed the scenes. They did not intervene, they did not even take any steps to stop these atrocities.
The community again set an example of perfect steadfastness under extreme suffering and complete confidence in God. The bereaved and the afflicted managed to make their way to the headquarters of the movement, where Huzur applied the healing balm of compassion and love to their lacerated souls and sent them back comforted and consoled. They came with grief-stricken, gloomy faces and went back smiling and cheerful.
Well, actually, it's quite ironic because lots of Ahmadis and a great deal of number of Ahmadis in Pakistan had very flourishing businesses, large businesses, very profitable businesses, very renowned businesses. And those were burnt and looted and gutted. I have seen those people who started off right from the scratch, from a little box of a shop to start off again. And by the grace of Allah, that the world saw them, that they flourished. They even did, in instances, they even did better than before. They were back on their feet in no time. And it was quite amazing to see that the same people redeveloped their businesses, again back to the same glory, if not better.
Under the leadership of their beloved Khalifatul Masih, the community at large emerged from the trial stronger, more united and in greater vigour than had been the case before the troubles started. This was something that puzzled the opponents of the movement and which they were not able to comprehend. They felt that a greater effort on their part was called for in order to coerce the members of the movement into submission.
There were slogans against the community, processions against the community, meetings were being conducted in various places, and throughout the country, a wave of opposition against the community started. And things went like this, and as a result of that, many Ahmadis, scores of Ahmadis, actually they had to lay down their lives. They became the martyrs of Ahmadiyyat for the sake of Ahmadiyyat, for the truth. And their houses were put on fire, their properties were damaged, and they were beaten up, they were insulted, they were boycotted, their food provisions were stopped from them, and all types of tortures was inflicted upon them. So those days were actually very, very tough for the community. And on one side, this was happening. On the other side, the movement started by the mullahs of the time that the Ahmadiyya Jamaat should be declared a non-Muslim community.
In 1974, there was again a lot of instigation against the Jamaat, and a lot of anti-Ahmadiyya sentiment was fomented by the mullahs at that time. And their main premise was that members of the community, and at least as far as the law, as far as the constitution was concerned, that members of the Jamaat are to be declared non-Muslims. And so the government at that time, which was that of the Prime Minister at that time, was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and his government at that time then proceeded to put this towards the National Assembly.
In September 1974, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah was summoned to the National Assembly of Pakistan, in which this was again an orchestrated drama by the National Assembly, that they questioned Hazrat Khalifatul Masih in minutest details, at length, about the doctrines, about the faith, about the basis of the faith of Ahmadiyyat in Islam, to which Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimahullah and his team were able to provide answers in so unambiguous and detailed and satisfactory manner that it actually ridiculed, it was as a result, the whole assembly was ridiculed, and it made them look ridiculous in their own eyes. Nevertheless, as it had already been planned, the motion was carried by the National Assembly, it was sent to the Senate, and within the matter of hours of having been sent, it was passed by the Senate, just as it had been planned.
Despite repeated requests, the proceedings of the Committee of the National Assembly have not yet been made public, proof that the opponents of the movement did not emerge with any credit from the proceedings. As has always been the case in the history of the movement, this is only one side of the picture.
Naturally, that was very disappointing, that was totally wrong. But the result was that while this decision was taken on one side, there was a lot of people within Pakistan who became more curious, and they decided that we should find out what is the reality about that, instead of taking the decision in this way that, well, if the government has decided, that must be right. There were many, many people in all parts of Pakistan who became very curious that after all, why this decision has been taken. So let's go and find out. So the result was that more and more people contacted the Ahmadis here and there and demanded for literature and demanded for explanation and wanted to have more and more information. And also, large number of people, they started visiting Rabwa.
The instigation against the Jamaat at that time, and after the motion was tabled, there was a lot of anti-Ahmadiyya sentiment, and really it was to ensure that the government of that time coerced and confirmed, and basically through the legislative body declared us as non-Muslims. But what happened was that once we were declared as non-Muslims, then the mullahs, the Maulvis, and those creating trouble for us thought they had succeeded, and the riots basically broke up because they had achieved their aim. But such is the way of Allah that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto himself, who had instigated this and whose government had actually led to us being, at least in the eyes of the law for Pakistan itself, being declared as non-Muslims. He himself was, through the instigation of General Zia in 1979, and in league with the same people, really, who had instigated this. Then they got rid of him, and he was executed after, again, a trial. And we again regard it as divine retribution in some regards for carrying on with declaring us as non-Muslims.
In 1975, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III visited the United Kingdom, West Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Holland and Switzerland. Laying the foundation stone of the Nasir Mosque at Gothenburg, Sweden, on the 27th of September 1975, was a momentous event of this tour. In July 1976, Huzur paid a visit to Ahmadi communities in the United States and Canada. Huzur arrived in Washington on the 25th of July 1976 and visited New York, Dayton and New Jersey. This was the first time that an Ahmadi Khalifa had travelled to this part of the world. This was indeed a very successful visit. Various Ahmadis got the opportunity of meeting with the exalted personage and benefiting from his sublime discourses.
He attended various receptions and press conferences while he was in North America. One such reception was held at World Trade Center in New York on the 4th of August 1976. He also attended the 29th Jalsa Salana, the annual convention of USA Jamaats, during his visit. First Jalsa Salana of United States of America, it was that any Khalifa attended.
One of the most eventful incidents of the Third Khilafat, and indeed of the Ahmadiyya movement, was the Deliverance of Jesus from the Cross conference that took place in London in June 1978. Huzur arrived in London in June 1978, and the conference itself was opened on the 2nd of June at the Commonwealth Institute in Kensington, London. Literature relevant to the theme of the conference, produced by the eminent historians and writers, were on display. For this historic event, believers and friends came to gather information and to be addressed by Orientalists, archaeologists, scholars and theologians of many religions who had been invited from all over the world to speak on their beliefs. The opening ceremony took place before a packed main hall and to overflowing audiences in adjacent halls by television. There were participants from Pakistan, India, Africa, Asia, Europe and the USA. Eminent speakers like Sir Zafrullah Khan and Sahibzada Mirza Muzaffar Ahmad read their scholarly papers. In his address, Huzur spoke of the total uniqueness and perfection of God, the creator and master of all, and of man's total dependence upon him. He went on to compare the Christian and Islamic teachings, and with support from the Holy Quran, spoke at great length of the deliverance of Jesus from the cross. He conveyed with great love and humility the message to millions. Thousands of Europeans who listened to Huzur's address were impressed by the depth and breadth of his knowledge. Newspapers from around the world, magazines, television and radio carried news of the event in their respective countries. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih's visit to London in 1978 provided him with a unique opportunity to catch a brief glimpse of British politics at the House of Commons. On the 7th of June, he was invited to the House of Commons by Mr. Tom Cox, Member of Parliament. In the members' dining room at the House of Commons, over 100 friends of the Ahmadiyya movement enjoyed the warm reception and hospitality extended to them. All the invited guests had the opportunity of meeting the revered head of the Ahmadiyya movement. Huzur spent some time talking to dignitaries. An added highlight to this informal occasion was provided as the House of Commons was in session on that day, and a number of members of Parliament spent time talking to Huzur. Several religious denominations were represented, including members of the Jewish and Catholic faiths. The visit lasted for over 3 hours. Concluding the afternoon, Huzur visited the public gallery to observe the House of Commons in session, in what is the heart of British democracy. The promised Messiah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said, "God has conveyed to me that my followers will excel so much in knowledge and insight that they will confound all others with the light of their truth, their reasoning, and their signs." This prophecy had been fulfilled in various forms over the passage of time and will continue to do so. During the blessed reign of the Third Khilafat, this prophecy was magnificently manifested in the person of Professor Dr. Abdus Salam.
I am a theoretical physicist, and we theoretical physicists are engaged on the following problem. We would like to understand the entire complexity of inanimate matter in terms of as few fundamental concepts as possible.
He was a renowned scientist who received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1979 from the King of Sweden. He was the first Muslim, and in fact first Pakistani, to receive this prestigious award.
Just by way of background, of course, when my father was awarded the Nobel Prize in October 1979, he received a phone call from the Nobel Foundation that morning, and his immediate reaction upon receiving this amazing piece of news was to come straight to the Khalifatul Masih in London and offer Nawafil prayer. And then he returned back to home and began the various phone calls. And of course his first phone call was to Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III to inform him of the news. And I know, I wasn't actually there at the time, but my mother told me afterwards that the message from Huzur was of warm congratulations and of how this is a great matter of pride, for all Ahmadi Muslims and all Pakistanis and the whole world over, that the first Muslim to win a Nobel Prize for physics was an Ahmadi.
In 1980, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih again travelled to Europe. Huzur inaugurated the Nur Mosque in Oslo, Norway, on the 1st of August 1980. The highlight of this tour was the laying of the foundation stone of the Basharat Mosque in Pedroabad, near Cordoba, Spain, on the 9th of October 1980. This was the first mosque to be built in Spain, 700 years after the Spanish Inquisition. On this occasion, he announced the magnificent Islamic motto, "Love for all, hatred for none." Later, Huzur travelled to Canada and the United States. This was Huzur's last tour of any country outside Pakistan.
The tours of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis, Rahimullah, like any other tours of a Khalifa, is to elevate the spiritual the elevation of the Ahmadis all over the world. And it is the Khalifa who is the man of God. And ultimately, practically people all over the world, the Ahmadis all over the world, they can't practically come to the Khalifa all the time. So the Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis traveled a lot in terms of, to Europe, to Canada, to the United States. And there he had the opportunity to meet Ahmadis, as well as to actually proclaim and spread the message of Ahmadiyya through Islam. So that was the first contact those Ahmadis had after a long time, who couldn't actually come to Pakistan all along. So that was one significance, that number one, Ahmadis could actually get in touch with their beloved Khalifa. Number two, even those people who were non-Ahmadis or Christians in this Western world, Europe or Canada or States, they had the opportunity to listen to the words of the Khalifa, the man of God. And that was their opportunity to listen to the true message of Islam. So the message, the beneficence, the benefit of the visit was twofold, for the Ahmadis as well as for the non-Ahmadis in general. Hazrat Sayyida Mansoora Begum Sahiba, the first wife of Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimullah, passed away after a brief illness on the 3rd of December, 1981. And she was the daughter of Hazrat Nawab Mubaraka Begum Sahiba, the daughter of the promised Messiah alayhi salam. The children of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimullah from his first wife were Sahibzada Mirza Nasir Ahmad Sahib, Sahibzadi Amtul Shakur Begum Sahiba, Sahibzadi Amtul Halim Begum Sahiba, Sahibzada Mirza Farid Ahmad, and Sahibzada Mirza Luqman Ahmad.
After the demise of his first Begum, in 1982, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis again decided and thought about remarrying. And it was a step he took not very lightly. He prayed and supplicated for 40 days. He also requested the elders of the Jamaat at that time to do dua istikhara. And eventually he was reassured, divinely reassured, that his supplications had been met, and that he was comforted that yes, he felt he was comfortable with proceeding with the marriage. And I think on the 11th of April in 1982, he had the nikah and he was married to Sayyida Tahir Siddiqa Sahiba, and she is the daughter of a very devout Ahmadi. His name was Abdul Majid Khan Sahib of Veeraval, and this was again in April 1982, and Hazur Mr. Salis Rahimahullah passed away in June 1982. So the marriage was for a few months, but again it was at that time. Before that, it was again the Jamaat again felt very comforted by it as well.
In June 1982, while Huzur was visiting Islamabad, he suffered a severe heart attack. He passed away on the 9th of June 1982 at 12:45 p.m. in Islamabad at the age of 73. May his soul rest in peace.
After his death, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, the janazah was brought to Rabwa. There was the election of the fourth Khalifa, who was Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad Rahimullah. And it was in the evening of the election that the janazah, the tadfeen of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimullah took place in Beheshti Maqbara. And I still remember those days, because I was very standing or walking as well all along, very close to Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi Rahimullah. So I remember very well, clearly those days and that special evening, because they were like, it was unimaginable, because it was like hundreds and thousands of people all over. So wherever one could see, it was like a crowd, and people had gathered from all over the world to offer their respects and to participate in the janazah of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis Rahimullah.
Huzur's passing was a grievous loss to the community, but everyone bore the tremendous loss with fortitude, keeping in view the sublime teachings of Islam. During the 17 years of his Khilafat, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III, with his unique leadership and strength, was certainly able to expand and serve the Jamaat remarkably.
उसकी सूरत हसी, उसकी सीरत हसी, वो शगुफ्ता दहन, वो कुशादा जबीं, दर्स अहले वफा को यही दे गया, प्यार सबसे किसी से भी नफरत